This lovely little girl is more than just a nice antique picture. Its history is involved with Wadsworth. Welcome to In Touch. I'm Lucy Sondel. With me today is David Rodich again to share some more of Wadsworth history with all of us. David, can you tell me something about this little Miss Daisy?
Well, little Daisy was one of the Currier and Ives prints given out as a premium by the Young Folks Gem. And behind the Young Folks Gem is a story of a local boy's rise to success and plunge to disaster.
All in Wadsworth here, huh?
All in Wadsworth.
Okay. Let's have a picture of the Young Folks Gem. I don't know if many people out there remember what that actually is here.
The Young Folks Gem was started by a man named George Bennett. And as a teenager, George Bennett was mocked by the other children. He was very tall, thin, had unstylishly long hair for the period. They called him Bennett's clothespin. And because of the humiliation he suffered as a child, he decided to get back at these people by making a huge financial success of himself. And he published for a time, or distributed some literature that we're told would be a scarce article in a Sunday school library, and ended up in jail in Cleveland for that.
What kind of literature was he distributing?
At the time, it was identified simply as bawdy pictures.
Ah. How old was George at this time?
He would have been probably about 16, 17 years old.
Okay.
And then he struck on an idea to start his own newspaper. And not having the money to finance this, he hoed corn for 3 days for $1 a day, and took the $3 he had earned to put advertisements in newspapers around the country. At that time, the farmers were being ruined by a pest that infiltrated their corn crops, destroying it. And he put a notice in the paper saying, "Farmers, the only known cure for this pest, send 25 cents. So farmers from around the country sent in their quarters. He sent them back a slip of paper that said, "Pull them out and burn them, the only known cure." Well, the farmers were outraged, and they demanded that he be arrested, but there wasn't anything that the law could do to him because he hadn't lied. That was the only known cure. Using the money that he got from this, he began publishing a paper in a little shack on his father's farm at Clark's Corners called the Young Folks Gem.
Okay, we'll show this picture again.
It was filled with a lot of moralistic stories for children, poems that were submitted by the readers, and a lot of advertisements. But the thing that sold the paper was the premium system, which most probably George Bennett began in this country. He would form gem clubs and tell the children that for selling so many subscriptions, they'd get a certain prize. At that time, Kit Carson, Wild Bill Hickok, they were all very popular, and all the boys wanted a 6-shooter. Well, he told them for so many subscriptions, they'd get a 6-shooter. What they really got was a pop gun with 6 corks tied to it. Another one of the gifts that he gave was a watch, a beautiful gold watch. He failed to mention, however, that it didn't have any workings inside it. He never really lied, he just didn't tell the truth. At that time, Wadsworth had a population of about 1,200, including the township, and Sharon Center had a population of about 250.
Okay. About what year or decade is this?
In the 1870s. Began in 1872. They started shipping the papers out by farm wagons. It took 10 farm wagons to haul them to Akron. Eventually, the railroad sent through a special train to pick
here
them
to Wadsworth to pick the young gems.
And the postmaster's salary was raised because of the extra burden.
Was it printed here in Wadsworth too?
It was printed here at the same at John Clark's printing house, the same place where the Wadsworth Enterprise newspaper was printed. And
he was the editor, and he deemed himself the editor?
Yes, he was the editor of it, though he really never did any of the writing himself.
Never.
He was just the idea man, you might say. Bennett took to living in the Sharon Hotel and fell into some of the ways of loose living that some people do when they suddenly come into money, and contracted pneumonia and was paralyzed in bed. And during that time, a lot of his fortune disappeared at the hands of some people who weren't very scrupulous. The subscription list at that time was nearing 400,000. And
nationwide?
Nationwide, every state that then existed in the Union, and as far away as Australia.
Oh, my God.
To get in the last day's receipts, the employees had to jump up and down on the money in the trunk, like hay, to mash it down so they could
seal the trunk and
close the lid. And finally, on just as spring arrived in 1874, Bennett stood up in bed, called for his mother, and fell back dead, not quite 23 years old. His body was taken to Western Star for burial, and there were rumors immediately that he lay uneasy in the grave where his employees had placed him, and he was seen to walk of nights in the cemetery. John Clark, the printer, purchased the young folks' gem and enlarged his printing house. This building's now Barlett's Flowers on the ground floor, the American Legion building upstairs, and built this 3-story printing house to handle the tremendous volume of this paper. Unfortunately, Mr. Clark tried to run it honestly and soon went broke.
He didn't have those special deals for subscriptions to the gym?
Well, he gave honest prizes.
Oh, I see.
And it
Watches with
bankrupted him.
works in it.
And it bankrupted him.
Yeah.
So all that remains now is a stray issue here and there, and the Courier and Ives prints that were given out.
Okay. And the picture that we held up originally, the Miss Daisy, was one of those.
Little Daisy was one of those.
The premium.
And if you notice down at the bottom.
Oh, here, I'm sorry. I thought you meant the other picture.
Down at the bottom is the notation that it's presented to every subscriber of the Young Folks Gem, published at Wadsworth, Ohio, at 30 cents per year.
Oh, my heavens. And they also gave a little boy also. As
Little Manly.
Little Manly. Okay, let me hold that one up also. You have both of these, right? How did you get a hold of these?
Well, the first one that you showed, Little Daisy, I purchased at an auction here in Wadsworth. And Little Manly, he's not quite as colorful as Daisy is, but he's much harder to find. And I tracked him down at an auction in Indiana and purchased it by telephone.
Oh, my God. So it had gotten to Indiana. Well, maybe they had sold the subscriptions in Indiana and had gotten this as their bonus. Was this type of selling fairly common at that time, or was he kind of entrepreneur of a new kind?
I don't have any statistics to back this up, but I believe that George Bennett probably originated the premium system in this country. And if he had used his talents in a more ethical way, perhaps he could be someone we read about in our history books. Instead, by the time Wadsworth Memorial was published in 1875, his story is just barely mentioned.
Oh,
apparently, even though a great many people in Wadsworth rose to wealth because of him, once he was dead, I think it was something they wanted to put behind them and forget about.
I see. When I held up a picture of the Young Folks Gym. Do you want to explain how you got a hold of this? It was not this. Was Young Folks Gym this size, the newspaper?
Approximately that size page.
So it was more like a magazine type?
Yes, but it wasn't bound or thick like a magazine. Now, more like a pamphlet or a brochure.
And where does this come from? Because this is a reproduction.
That was just copied from a negative.
Okay, so someone had taken a picture of this?
Of the original,
and you had
that printed.
Okay. Just to kind of read some of these things that perhaps you couldn't see on the television. It says that the Young Folks Gem was published at Wadsworth, Medina County, Ohio, the best and cheapest, it says here. And it says, for the best for the money in America, charming, beautiful engraving, Little Daisy given free to every subscriber. And Daisy was the little girl I had showed you. For those people who don't know, George Bennett, you said, was buried at Western Star. Well, where is Western Star?
Western Star is east of Wadsworth. Western Star lies on the boundary between Medina and Summit County, between Wadsworth and Norton. And at one time it was a regularly incorporated municipality, and in fact was the only debt-free municipality in the whole state of Ohio before it surrendered its incorporation.
Now, is that down on Broad Street? I mean, is it down?
Medina Line Road.
On Medina Line Road?
It lay pretty much half to one side of Medina Line Road and half to the other. In fact, when they were a municipality, they had a voting booth for the two sides, one for Medina County and one for Summit County, and you'd go in the appropriate door for your county.
Has George Bennett's ghost been seen lately?
No. In fact, Mrs. Shapiro in her Wadsworth Heritage in 1964 wrote that in recent years, George Bennett's large white tombstone has been knocked down by marauders of this country cemetery, unmindful of the reported threats of George Bennett's ghost. Some years ago, I arranged to have that stone uprighted, and apparently he rests a little more comfortably now. It's interesting that they say that he's not happy being buried there because he's buried with his family. And you would think that would be the ideal place that someone would want to be buried. Unfortunately, his family didn't treat him very well in life or in death.
I see. Yeah. Okay, now what else do you have for us? Would you like to show?
Well, we talked last time about some of the calendars, which are normally thrown away at the end of the year, and so not too many of them survive. But this is how easily someone can be fooled. Here's a nice clean calendar from Overholt and Freeborn IGA store from 1935, which is an original.
Yes, it still has, well, evidently someone tore January off and this stuff.
It has most of the, and on the back of the months are recipes.
Oh.
However, at one auction, I was crossing the lawn just as they said, a 1909 calendar. Well, I hadn't seen it, but I raised my hand to bid on it immediately, and I won it. It wasn't until afterwards that I realized that it was from Kuhn's Bakery, which would have told me immediately it couldn't be from 1909. This is a reproduction calendar that has 1909 on it, but actually it's from 1965. The days fell the same way in that year, so they made a reproduction of that calendar. So I ended up paying quite a bit of money for a calendar that's not even 20 years old. In fact, I even have another one of them. But that just shows that you have to be very careful when you purchase things like that.
Well, you knew immediately because Kuhn's Bakery was in operation.
Right, it hadn't been in operation in 1909.
Okay.
But a lot of the things that are collectible, a lot of the things that help us understand history are what might be called throwaway items, things that you don't normally keep. Now this little booklet is a memorial booklet that was put out after the death of Dr. Leiter. Thomas Leiter was a dentist in Wadsworth, and his home later became the library. But something like this would be kept forever because of its specialness to an individual. It gives the address that was preached at his funeral. But a lot of things...
So this booklet was printed in his honor and distributed at his funeral.
It was quite common in those days to print a memorial book and give all of the obituaries and so forth. But something like this would be kept because of its special nature. However, a lot of things, as we say, are just throwaway items, like a pay envelope. Now, most of us, when we get our paycheck at the end of the week, we take the check out of the envelope, throw the envelope away, and cash the check.
Just an old pay envelope here.
But at this time, people were still paid in cash. And this is a pay envelope from the Ohio Match Company. And this gentleman, Cosmo Chapin, was later the purchasing agent for the match. And you can see it's dated August of 1906. During that pay period, he had worked 68 hours at 9 cents an hour and made the grand sum of $6.12. Luckily for us, Mr. Chapin didn't throw that away.
That's more than I do.
Oftentimes when restaurants publish a new menu, they throw their old menus out, or they become soiled and torn, and they're just disposed of. But this is a menu from Brown's Restaurant at 117 Broad Street, which would be where John Hanna is now located. And that's one of their, I guess you'd say, short order menus. Okay,
so you can have waffles with syrup, butter, and coffee for 25 cents. So maybe that $6.12 that the Ohio Match employee got would go a little further.
It went a little further than it does nowadays. This is a handbill that, again, would be read and thrown away. Perhaps you've been shopping, you go out into the parking lot of the mall, and someone stuffed a flyer under your windshield wiper. You might look at it, toss it away. Luckily for us, things like this have survived. This was Horse Company Day, and Horse Company Day in Wadsworth was a big event. It was for the Society for the Prevention and Detection of Horse Thieves. And it was a company that was organized to, you might say an insurance company, to protect owners of horses from horse thieves. And every year the company would meet and have their annual meeting, much as a corporation would have their annual meeting. And it was tradition that the ladies of the Lutheran Church would serve their meal. And this is just a flyer giving the menu for that day.
For that meal.
And as you see, for their dinner that day, they could have chicken and biscuits, roast beef, mashed potatoes, peas, slaw, bread and butter, jelly, cheese, pickles, donuts, tea, and coffee for 25 cents, and fruit for dessert.
You didn't have to worry about cholesterol back then either, did they?
And for their supper menu, if you couldn't afford the 25 cents for dinner, you could stay for supper and have creamed potatoes, cold meat, baked beans, bread, butter, jelly, smear case, apple butter, cheese, pickles, tea, coffee, cake, and fruit for 15 cents.
What's smear case, do you know?
Cottage cheese.
Cottage cheese.
You're not German.
No, I'm not German. What?
Smear case is cottage cheese.
Oh, I didn't even pronounce it right. When you say Horse Company Day, were there specific things that did they circulate pictures of known horse thieves, or?
They would organize, and they would have, it covered the entire area. It was actually a Wadsworth organization, but it spread throughout the entire county. In other words, members lived in other parts of the county.
It originated here in Wadsworth, perhaps?
Yes, and if if a horse was stolen, they would organize a posse, you might say, and comb the county to try and apprehend the thief. The truth is, I've never heard of anyone stealing a horse in Wadsworth. I think they got more enjoyment out of the annual dinner than anything else.
Yes, it sounds like a reason to get together and celebrate, especially in February when it's kind of as you know, a month of rain.
But my purpose in showing you these things is to illustrate that a lot of the things that give us information about history are things that we would normally throw away. When you empty a flour sack at home, I assume people still bake, you empty a flour sack at home, you throw it in the trash. You wouldn't think about it. But this one is from the Wadsworth Roller Mills, the Wadsworth Milling Company, and it was a bag of Champion flour. And of course, a lot of the old flour and salt and sugar sacks were cloth and were then later made into clothing. They were very decorative materials.
And they were made out of material, not
right, but this one is just
paper.
like paper. It's very surprising that this has stayed, and apparently it was something that got stuck in the back of somewhere, and it was probably saved because someone forgot to throw it out.
Well, where was this mill located, the roller mill?
Down just south of the railroad tracks.
Was it common for the towns at that time to have their own mill on the... Generally
speaking, yes. Mm-hmm.
So the farmers then would bring their wheat to be ground here at the mill?
The Wadsworth Milling Company was quite a large concern, and what was left of the factory, I guess you'd say, of the mill, burned in a rather spectacular fire in the 1950s.
1950, oh my. So a lot of people would remember the mill.
Oh, I'm sure.
It wasn't in operation up till the 50s, was it?
It was being used, and then they also operated a grain elevator there, and then there were several buildings behind it that were also burned at the same time. That's why it was quite a spectacular fire. Mm-hmm. Another thing most people throw out, a lot of people collect license plates off of cars, but this is a bicycle license plate.
Yeah, put this on against the dark end.
Now, as a child, by the time the end of the year came and when it was time to buy a new bicycle license, the old ones were usually so bent up and rusty that you'd take them off and throw them away. It never occurred to you to say that that's one from 1942.
You know, though many of us are trying to clean out our houses, and here you are telling us that all the things that we're throwing out are treasures, and they are.
Well, in fact, they are. And sometimes when I visit people, they don't think that they have anything of any value, because they don't, as we discussed last time, they don't have any great historic documents or photographs, but sometimes just prescription blanks from doctors, menus, bills of sale, things like that, which help to pinpoint a business in a particular location during a particular time period. It tells you a lot about life in those days.
We were going to also talk about the Red Cross auction. Okay, and we have some pictures here about that. And can you give us some background about the Red Cross auction? This is during World War II, was it?
No, this is World War I.
World War I. Well, that's why you're on the show.
Well, in fact, one way you can tell is because the building there, which was known as the Bauman Building, had not yet been replaced by what we would know as the Citizens Bank.
Okay, so the Citizens Bank
would be where
it
was replaced by this building, which was built in 1888. But this big pile in the street, behind the rather perplexed-looking gentleman, was an assemblage of items collected for a Red Cross auction. Wadsworth was trying to find a way to raise money for the war effort. They had a quota that they had to meet. And
the Red Cross gave them a quota to meet, or civic pride
yes, it's more
motivated that?
self-imposed.
Mhm.
And Ernie Curry, who was a furniture dealer, and he was in business with J.B. Hilliard, the undertaker, had heard about an auction that was held in another city where people donated items and this raised funds. So he suggested this, and as happens in most cases when you make a suggestion, someone puts you in charge of it. And he was made sales manager with Dr. Paul Goss, who many people will remember as a dentist in Wadsworth, as the chairman of the committee. And they had 30 canvassers who went to every home in Wadsworth and Wadsworth Township soliciting items, either baked goods or canned goods or some piece of furniture. And everyone contributed something, no matter how small, except one man who had strong pro-German sentiments. But even he, on the day of the auction, was forced to wave an American flag and sign a rather generous check. Everybody came up with something that they would want. You can see some of the items.
Okay. Well, I can't. Maybe if you could describe them. I don't know if they can be seen on the picture
there.
easily.
There was something for everyone. There was a Cadillac Roadster, a mule, 10 head of cattle, a registered buck, 25 goats, two pigs, and a collie pup. Chickens, ducks, and a load of hay, Surreys, $165 feed grinding mill in good condition, a Portland sleigh, and a buggy storm front, maple syrup, coffee, butter, 200 gallons of vinegar, a new Hoosier kitchen cabinet loaded with groceries and utensils, 5 organs, 3 vacuum hand sweepers, 4 baby beds, a churn, a cutting bench, quilts, and a camping tent, auto tires, spinning wheels, and a 100-year-old flail, a ukulele.
A 100-year-old what?
Flail.
I don't know what a flail is.
Flail. A ukulele, 6 tons of coal, a shotgun, 7 porch swings, 8 baby buggies, and even a kitchen sink.
So there was everything in here, including a kitchen sink.
Everything. 8 auctioneers worked, selling around town. The whole was preceded by a parade that began
Okay, let's get the next
through
picture
town.
here.
The Albrecht block, which we might know as Brenneman's, had just recently been completed. It was not completely done. And they sold livestock from some of the rooms in there and also sold baked goods. And a couple of men in the crowd decided that the cakes weren't going for a high enough price. They were only bringing 10 or 15 cents, so they decided to up the bidding. And Ernie Curry ended up spending $50 for a cake.
For one cake?
Baked by Mrs. C.B. Allen. It was angel food. And none of them went for less than 17. Then this group moved over to College Street, where they were selling canned goods in front of the Briggs and Pardee block. It's another scene of the
Okay, well,
crowd there.
just let me know when you want these flipped. Okay, now, what street is this on?
This is looking
Still?
across the square. This is the corner of Broad and High
Okay.
Street, when the Day Drug Company still occupied the corner room before Glenn Brenneman purchased the business.
And this is still the auction taking place?
Yes. And then
Okay, just, yeah.
this is on College Street. As I mentioned, they were selling canned goods in front of the Briggs and Pardee block.
Okay, these are just some gentlemen here deciding how much to buy for.
And those men went down there and raised the prices on the canned goods.
Okay, now these are cans probably that are home canned.
Home
right?
canned,
Yeah.
yes.
These, I bet the cooks in Wadsworth were thrilled to think a cake would go for $50.
The mayor of the town, Dr. Boyer, donated a Surrey with fringe around top. This is just a mule card. And
And where is
to
it
give,
taken?
this is on College Street. This would be where the drive-through is for Bank One.
Oh.
They would, you see, even the mules contributing has a sign on it that says, "Do your bit as I did." And the mayor donated this Surrey, and his wife paid $30 for the first ride around the park.
Oh. Okay, we have more pictures of this event.
It's a cartoon booth where people could go and have their caricature drawn.
Okay, I kind of moved them. Do you have any information of who any of these people are, or
No, unfortunately, I don't.
who the cartoons? Well, this is still an event that happens at Cedar Point. You can go and get your caricature drawn. So it dates back quite a bit here. And this last picture.
This is part of the parade going down Main Street. I don't know if you can't see the slogan on the side of the hearse, but it says, "Peace on earth, hell for the Kaiser."
Strong sentiments. Exactly. And then did they raise the amount of money that they had set out?
They raised over $14,000 for the war effort. And it was an event that is still talked about by some of the older citizens of Wadsworth. It was a great joining together of community spirit and pride and support for our men who were in the service.
Did they send the money then to Washington, D.C.? Was
I
there any record
assume
of
it was
what?
probably used through the national headquarters of the Red Cross, I would guess.
We don't have that much time left, but I've been curious to ask you about your family history.
Oh? Well, we're newcomers to town. We've only been here 6 generations.
Six generations?
Well, if you weren't here when the first tree fell, it doesn't count for
You
me.
aren't quite, huh?
But we just go back to my great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, who were immigrants from Europe. And my mother's family is from Pennsylvania, and she moved here when she married my father in 1946 at the end of the war, and has had to put up with my stories ever since.
Is Rodic, what nationality is that name?
Serbian.
It's Serbian? And
My mother's ancestors are Transylvanian.
oh, I see. You had told me before that you had done some corresponding across the ocean.
Yes, and now I am finding the government agencies over there. Previously, you would write, and it might take a year and a half before you got a response, if you got a response.
And this is to find some genealogy of
information.
your own.
Exactly. And I, just before Christmas, I received a call from the Yugoslavian consulate in Cleveland informing me that she had received a rather large package of certificates and records and things like that, things that they had previously told me did not exist, that they'd been destroyed in the war. But I think the openness and the glasnost in Europe now, at the end of the year, has helped with this. In fact, you asked about my family. My grandfather was an employee of the match company and died there in 1943, but if he were living, he would be 100 years old today.
This is his birthday. I bet he'd like to know that you were here on television in Wadsworth.
And sometimes, the point I've tried to stress again and again is that history is not always the valuable historical article. Sometimes they're just everyday things. And sometimes a picture that other people might look at and say,
oh,
well, those are nice fish, would mean a lot to someone like your children who would see their great-grandfather, along with Orrin Hanchett and Mayor Norman Stein and Highland Hoagland. And they were part of a group that every year went fishing, and this was one year's catch.
Oh, my. So his fish stories are true. Thank you very much, David, for bringing this picture. I know my family has appreciated that, too. And thank you for joining us on In Touch. David's promised to come back perhaps once a month and share some more of Wadsworth history with us. Thank you for watching. I'm Lucy Sondel.